Hey fellow Tamers and Digi-Destined, it's Mike AKA Synaku from OverGround, and do you hear that, guys? The yeah, I guess that's the hype train rolling into the station, because today we are looking at one of the most hyped and most popularized decks over the last couple of weeks, and that is the red-yellow security McDonald's, whatever you want to call it. And earlier on this week, we put out the War Greymon video. It was a deck list meant to kind of beat this deck. And, you know, I thought about it and I'm thinking, well, if I can't beat them, why not join them? But, you know, we got to throw in some of that OverGround spice. You know that I'm not, the type of person that's just going to build cookie-cutter lists when it comes to something that's super popular in the meta. So I got to kind of put my own stamp on it. And this is what we've come up with. So as you can see, there's an extra color. It's not quite red or yellow. There's actually blue, as you can see here. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we kind of get into the deck list. So if you've watched other videos and other deck lists kind of explaining the core strategy of this deck from other players, True Champion Steven has put out a list. Eli Hill put out a list that Max DePera was actually able to capture from the Gyroshan tournament. This is a deck designed around using the yellow cards specifically to manipulate your security through the recovery mechanic, as well as the red cards to constantly put powerful cards into your security to constantly deal with your opponent's threats. As they attack into your security, your active recovery will put cards into your security that will actively remove your opponent's threats. Well, also, you will play cards from your hand to control the board state. Basically, at the end of the day, this is all one giant control deck. You're generally playing about one card a turn, and you're ideally going to be kind of winning a war of attrition against your opponent. They're basically going to lose to themselves at the end of the day, because the more cards they play, the more opportunity you have to take cards away from them, limiting their options, and when they do finally get an attack in, they're just going to die to whatever's lurking inside your security. So it's a fun, super wacky deck that has a lot of potential, and I wanted to try kind of my own personal spin on it. So this is what you see before you right now. So I'm going to talk about each color individually as I kind of wrap up the deck. And again, if you've seen similar videos of other YouTubers and other content creators making a deck like this, they've already pretty much covered the gamut of what the majority of these cards here are for. I'm just here to talk about why I decided to build this deck in the way that I did. So let's talk about the blue package here. So normally in a red-yellow security deck, you'll see a lot of people play things like this Salamon as a rookie. And then you also have the Promo Patamon here as well. And these are both cards that generally would be placed on your low end. You're not ever going to be evolving over them. You're using them to constantly perpetuate that recovery win condition. And what you would do is that your babies would normally consist of Cupimon, for example, and you kind of use Cupimon as a draw engine, and then your extra egg would be something like an Upamon. And the idea is that you bring these rookies up and you attack with them and you trigger Cupimon to draw one. Now, my issue with this deck was the general lack of draw power in general, and I didn't like having to sacrifice either one of these early on in the game just to get a free attack in, just to get a draw, because since they were so weak, they were going to be destroyed no matter what. And especially in the case of Salamon, if you're not at that 3 security threshold, you're not getting any value out of her effect, so it's kind of like a waste. And similarly with the Patamon here, unless you're actually putting it into play through hard playing it or through something like Digimon, for example, you weren't actually getting any value out of it. So sure, you get a free cycle after you evolve onto the egg and you draw, and then you could potentially get a draw after you swing with the Cupimon underneath, but after that, it's just dead. It's done. You're not getting anything out of it anymore, and that's another recovery option in either shape of either rookie that you no longer have access to for the remainder of the game. And I found in testing that it just made me feel like the rookies were mostly irrelevant at the end of the day, because they didn't necessarily do much more for the deck if I had to use them outside their intended purpose. So I thought to myself, how do I get a bottom end that still gives me draw power, while simultaneously putting pressure on the opponent through early and fast swings? Enter Vmon. So Vmon with Demi Vmon is actually a really cool addition for this deck, because it offers two things. First of all, since it's the only rookie I'm playing, it's going to be the only rookie that's going to be going over top of Demi Vmon. And Demi Vmon reads, if a Digimon with jamming attacks, I get to draw one. And since this Vmon does have jamming, every single time it attacks, I'll automatically get a free draw no matter what. And because Vmon has jamming himself, I will be able to attack immediately into my opponent's security and not have to worry about losing my rookie. Instead, I'm going to force my opponent to waste one of their attacks onto this Vmon instead of attacking my security. And although I'm running a very strong recovery engine and my security is meant to deal with my opponent's threats, the more turns where my opponent isn't attacking my security gives me more time to constantly keep recovering and put myself into a position where my opponent just literally will not win the game. But the second reason we're playing blue is because even if we hatch a Demi-Vemon and we have no way to evolve over it, it puts a blue card in play to allow us to play Kaisernail. And Kaisernail, comparatively to the other yellow rookies that I talked about, is another way for us to recover for either the same cost or a little bit less. Because every single time we evolve over top of our Magna Angemon, it becomes a prime target for Kaisernail. We can bring that Magna Angemon out immediately and then gain an additional recovery as well as an extra body to swing with on the next turn. So Kaisernail is a really cool addition for this deck because it allows you to add more pressure in terms of going wide, as well as constantly add more cards into your security that can deal with your opponent's stuff. And in a deck that you're only pretty much playing one card per turn, Kaisernail allows you kind of extend yourself in a way where you go into your next turn, you actually have more options to fulfill your plays. So that is pretty much it for the blue package. It's just a way to give me a consistent and reliable draw engine, quick chip damage, and forces my opponent to have to actively go after the Vemon instead of any other potential threats that might be sitting on my board. Or it might even potentially force them to set up a blocker that they otherwise wouldn't have not wanted to do, which can just be, eaten up by the myriad of removal cards that we have on a regular basis. So now we're going to go into the yellow engine itself. So we're playing 4 Magna Angemon. Again, you know him, you love him, 7 cost on play, recover 1. He is pretty much the crux and heart and soul of the deck. He's generally going to be your turn 1 play, or he's going to be at least a play that you're going to be going into relatively quickly. To complement him in terms of the level 5s that we play, especially for Kaisernail targets, we're playing 3 copies of Mistymon. Mistymon isn't as powerful as he used to be in 1.0 because the majority of DP for smaller Digimon, the threshold has kind of increased a little bit. We're seeing a lot of rookies now kind of bypass that 3,000 range to 4,000 or 5,000, and we're seeing a lot of players taking advantage of that so that they can play around cards like Volcanic Dramon. But Mistymon is still very powerful because, especially in a deck like this where we're giving our opponent a ton of memory, the general knee-jerk reaction is to kind of go wide. Because since everything in your security is so powerful and so detrimental to the opponent, going wide is sometimes the safest route to go, because that way you can just swing with all these piddly little attackers and not have to worry about putting a lot of resources into one giant stack just to see it fall. But then Mistymon kind of counteracts that strategy because when it comes into play, it can immediately knock out 2 of those Digimon. Then moving on to the Megas, we're playing 3 Seraphimon, 4 Magna Dramon, and 1 Slash Angemon. Seraphimon is here to complement our Magna Angemon specifically because it gives us more opportunities to recover, and on top of a Magna Angemon, depending on how many security we have, our Seraphimon can actually reach pretty big heights DP-wise. And if we have 3 or more security, Seraphimon will always attack for security attack +1. Now, complement that with the Vemon that allows us to add a very strong amount of pressure onto our opponent very early on. To complement the Seraphimon and to complement kind of the Kaisernail package as a whole, we're playing other Megas that we can evolve over our level 5s to have targets for Kaisernail. And that's why we're playing the additional Slash Angemon just as an extra source of removal, an extra kind of toolbox option to deal with things like blockers or things like other Digimon that our opponent might be potentially setting up a stack for. And the 4 Magna Dramon is here because we can evolve it on top of one of our ultimates if necessary to trigger Kaisernail, but also because since we're not playing those rookies, to generate other forms of recovery, Magna Dramon is the only general hard play form of recovery that we have outside of Magna Angemon. So this puts us in situations where if our opponent is playing an aggressive deck and manages to get us to that 3 security threshold often, Magna Dramon, having multiple copies of her, allows us to constantly go back up to 5, constantly fuel our security with powerful cards, and constantly keep us in the game and allow us to last a little bit longer and constantly control our opponent's board. And to round out the yellow engine before we talk about the options, we're playing 3 copies of TK. This is because the majority of the deck is yellow, so 9 times out of 10 you're going to be fishing cards out of your security that are yellow. They're going to help you advance your game state. And then TK will also allow you to constantly go to 3 every turn, meaning that you're not going to be giving your opponent as much memory depending on how you end up having to play the game. So now let's talk about the yellow options, which is kind of the first layer of removal that this deck has. And we're playing 4 Eden's Javelin, 4 Seven Heavens, and 2 Lightning Paw. Eden's Javelin, if you're unfamiliar, is you get to draw a card, and then for every card in your hand, you minus 1,000 times those numbers of cards in your hand to one of your opponent's Digimon. And that's very powerful because, again, it gives us kind of a draw engine on our opponent's turn if they attack into our security and we trip it. Otherwise, now that we have this Vemon engine and we're constantly getting free draws and increasing our hand size on a regular basis, Eden's Javelin becomes that much more powerful now because if we do have to hard play it from our hand, we have the potential to knock out Digimon that are maybe like 10, 11, 12,000 DP. Then we're playing Seven Heavens. Now, 4 copies of Seven Heavens seems a little extreme, and most versions of this deck play Glorious Burst. I wanted to make sure that every single option in my security will always trigger no matter what, and that's why I chose to omit Glorious Burst from this list. And the reason was that having 4 copies of Seven Heavens as opposed to like the 3, maybe 1 or 2 Glorious Burst, means that if my opponent is on something with like a security attack plus, Seven Heavens can essentially reduce the DP to a point where if it does run into another Digimon down the road in my security stack, it will ultimately be destroyed. So even if it doesn't get destroyed, and the same argument kind of with Eden's Javelin, so if it doesn't get destroyed just off a sheer straight removal card, it should get destroyed in tandem with everything else that reduces DP. So they're kind of like extra checkpoint gates, I guess, in a sense, that help you kind of get your security to keep dealing with your opponent's stuff. And then if they are in your hand, it also helps you really powerfully in the early game because you can constantly get rid of your opponent's stacks to prevent them from going into those Mega Digimon that can give them security attack +1. It also prevents you, especially like Shine Greymon, for example, prevents your opponent from hitting that special stack that can get them into a Shine Greymon. And finally, we're playing the 2 Lightning Pod. This is here primarily for the Rookie Rush matchup. Again, this is why we've also bumped up the Mistymon count to 3 for this deck, because they serve similar purposes, and that's just because your opponent will constantly be able to go wide in the strategy that we're constantly giving them a ton of memory. And Lightning Paw allows us, similarly to Mistymon, to kind of deal with that entire wide board in one fell swoop by reducing up to 3 of our opponent's level 3 Digimon by 4,000. So Lightning Paw hits a little bit more than what Mistymon does. It doesn't give us the extra body that Mistymon would have given us otherwise. So that's it for the yellow package. Now let's move on to the red package. So we've got 4 Gaia Force, 2 Shield of the Just, and 1 Plasma Stake. Gaia Force, there's not really much to say. Best option in the game, immediate removal for anything that we want. Shield of the Just is a bit of a new card that's seeing play recently for this sort of deck, and it saw a little bit of play in 1.0 for mostly as a Gaia Force replacement if people didn't really have copies, but now it's kind of seeing a resurgence. And Shield of the Just, if you're unfamiliar, it deletes a Digimon with 5,000 or less, but if you have a Red Tamer in play, that threshold gets bumped up to 8,000 instead. And because we're playing 3 Red Tamers, which are the 3 ties here, that we can manage to get that second effective Shield of the Just more often than not. And again, this kind of goes in tandem with the rest of the deck, where we're constantly focusing on getting rid of our opponent's stacks to prevent them from evolving any further and prevent them from keeping any sort of advantage or presence on the board whatsoever. And to round out the options, we're playing the 1 Plasma Stake. Plasma Stake is a new card from 1.5, and it reads that you can delete one of your opponent's Digimon with 13,000 DP or more. This is just here as a tech option to deal with stuff like Omnimons, to deal with stuff like Shine Greymons, because especially on your opponent's turn, depending on how many Tamers they have in play, it can reach pretty crazy heights, and none of your security Digimon-wise can generally kill that, and sometimes it's hard for your DP reduction effects to actually kill it as well. So Plasma Stake is just another option to kind of deal with that potential attacker and deal with whatever your opponent is currently having advantage-wise on the table. And finally, the last 4 red cards outside of tie are the 4 Security Greymon. This is here because it allows an opportunity for us to get a red card in play for free to play our red options if they get stuck in our hand, and B, it allows us to add extra pressure against our opponent because for them attacking us, they're giving us a free body that we get to attack with them on the following turn. Combo that with the chip damage with Vmon and security attack +1s that we get through Seraphimon. Sometimes you can end games a little bit faster than you intended to just because you have a couple of these Greymons hiding in your security. On the worst case scenario, they're only a 5 cost, and because you're going to 3 with TK anyway, you can just kind of drop them, put your opponent to 2, and just have a body on board to start swinging on the next turn. So we're going to look at the Tamers next. So we have the 3 tie. This is the 2 cost tie that gives all your Digimon plus 1,000. In the context of Seraphimon, for example, when you're coming in with the Magna Angemon, your Seraphimon can hit some pretty insane heights DP-wise. Tie just kind of helps you get over opponent's Digimon as well that you otherwise might have not been able to. And in random circumstances, it actually makes your Vmons 3,000. So depending on the Rookie Rush, or if you're playing against like Imperial or something like that, and they're playing their own opposing Vmons, you can actually attack with your Vmon over their Vmon, get a free draw, and then keep your body as well, which is kind of cool. It's just kind of like weird niche scenarios that Tai comes up with. But other than that, similarly to the Greymon, Tai gives us a red card that we can put in play that can potentially be triggered off of our security as well to let us play red cards from our hand if that comes up. And then finally, the last 2 Tamers we're playing are the 2 Purple Mimi, and this is the Purple Mimi from 1.5. And she reads that during either player's turn, when any player plays an option card, you can suspend her to gain 1 memory. And this is very powerful because it basically means that every single one of the options that we're playing from our hand costs 1 less. So because we're going to 3 with TK anyway, Mimi basically says that we're going to 4 for all intents and purposes, because every option that we're going to play to deal with our opponent's threats will put them 1 less. Furthermore, if our opponent plays an option on their turn, we can actually suspend Mimi to start our turn with an additional memory as well. So this just kind of helps control it further adds a layer of control to the deck as well by constantly manipulating your opponent's ability to play options. This is also very strong against something like Hammerspark, for example, because having this in play means that your opponent's Hammerspark literally do nothing. They play it, they gain a memory, we tap Mimi, we go back to the one memory that they just gained. It essentially nullifies the entire card. So Mimi is just here to add an extra layer of control to the heavy amount of control that we're already playing and already doing on a regular basis. But yeah, this is the OverGround Synaku Spice, I guess, equivalent of the red-yellow security McDonald's deck. Is it great? Yes and no. Through a lot of testing, I actually managed to take this deck to a 4th place finish at Locals the other day out of 16 players. Our only loss was to one Imperial Ultraman deck, where our security was just absolute trash and they just kept getting away with free jamming. So that was just unfortunate, but these things happen. But other than that, yeah, it played very smoothly. A lot of the cards and interactions came together really well, and I'm really kind of happy with how it turned out. Is this the most consistent version of the deck? Not by a long shot, but it is something kind of more fun and more unique that I want to try to kind of put my own stamp on it. If you guys want to try something similar and you can, fool around with the ratios, let me know, because I'm curious to see what other ways we can build this deck and kind of expand on the base that has kind of been put forth over the last couple of weeks. I know some people have been putting together lists that include Gallantmon, and I actually played a deck similarly to that earlier on this week as well, where I was playing Sylphimons in this build as well as Gallantmons, specifically for the mirror match, because I was expecting to see a lot of it now that it kind of popped out of the woodwork. People could play Skull Greymons as well to put on Gallantmon on top of. Skull Greymon as a whole can just be included in the deck as a good red card that deals with opponent's blockers, then gives you a red card to play all your red options with. So there are a lot of kind of ways to constantly manipulate and change the deck in terms of metagaming or depending on matchups that you're expecting to see. But this is just something I put together for fun to try to experiment outside of the norm and kind of break a few barriers, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. But if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions about this deck as well, how would you change it? Do you think this deck is viable in the future? Do you think I should stop playing this and give it up altogether because it's pretty much cancer? But either way, let me know in the comment section below. If you like what we do here at OverGround, consider liking the video and consider subscribing as well and help us out a little bit there as well. I have been Mike, aka Synaku from OverGround, and I'll see you guys in the next one.